Everyone, for the next 2 weeks we're going to be working on this same prostate case. This week we're going to do the initial plan. Next week we'll work on the boost and then put both plans together for the plan sum. We'll go over all that next week. This week let's just focus on this single plan. Okay, let's insert our plan. For this week, I want everyone to pick PTV initial. We're going to be, or no, PTV total. Sorry, I'll show you the difference here in a little bit. PTV total. Okay, so what I'm going to give you is I have 3 PTV volumes here. We have this initial. So this is the node volume, and we're going to be treating the nodes to 46 gray. We have the boost volume down here. So this is how this is how most physicians I work with give me prostate volumes, okay? They have this volume down here that they want to go to 80 gray with, or something close to 80 gray. Then they give this separate volume for the nodes, something similar to this. Usually what people do is create a PTV total, which is just both of those combined, and put that in your prescription, since that's the total volume we're treating for this initial plan. But I'm going to use all 3 of these. Well, actually, I'm going to actually only use these 2 smaller volumes in my optimizer, and I'll talk about why here in a little bit. Let's go ahead and put our prescriptions. This week we're going to do 200 times 23. So something new for the arc geometry tool. So we do have a PTV total which contains both of those volumes. So I can just use that PTV total here. 1 ISO, 2 full rotation is going to work totally fine. But if you don't have a PTV total and you have multiple PTV volumes that you need to make sure you cover, if I accidentally do this and click apply, show you, it is only going to make sure it covers that initial volume. And remember, the PTV initial is only our nodes. So see, you look down here, it's missing that boost. As we rotate around, it'll be missing that boost volume. So what you need to do is use your control key, and you can actually select multiple volumes to use in this arc geometry tool. So now if I hit apply, you can see it opens up and it covers both of those volumes really well. Okay, so I'm just going to stick with 30 on this one. I think it'll work okay. Here is an example of a plan though that I'm going to close my jaws down a little bit. So I'm going to pick field 1. I'm going to close X1 just a couple cm. Get close to that 15 cm mark. For the other one, I'll do X2. So you want to make sure you do opposite sides, okay? So both are around that 15 cm mark. And again, the reason for that is because one MLC on the same bank can only travel 15 cm apart from any other MLC. If that concept still doesn't make sense to you, be sure to email me so we can talk more about that. But 15 cm, or about 15 cm, is generally where you want to be for most plans. So X1 I close down on this field, X2 I close down a little bit. So in this plan, I don't have, let me change this, whoops. In this plan, I did not create any AP avoid, PA avoid, any rings, any of those opti structures that we talked about in class last week. If you want to use them, please create them yourself. Totally fine. And I suggest you do create them just so you can experiment with them more, play around with them more, find out what you like to use and what you don't like to use. Okay, so the reason why I'm going to use both these initial volumes to plan with is The problem if you only use a PTV total volume like this is I could get 95% coverage on this bigger PTV total volume, but in reality I could be like, for example, I could be cold. I could be only covering 90% of this boost volume, but I could have really good coverage on this initial, so like 98, 99% coverage, right? Just because I have 95% on this total doesn't mean I'm covering both of these super well. I want to make sure I'm covering both of these individual volumes by at least 95%. So in the end, this PTV total is probably going to have more than 95% coverage. Hopefully that makes sense. But for that reason, I always add constraints to all of my smaller PTVs that make up my PTV total. So I'm going to do my typical lower 100% to 100%, upper 0% to 105%, and I'm going to leave my NTO at 100 and get started. So I should have really good coverage, not anything super crazy hot in this level 1, and that's because I'm not telling it to do anything other than that. If you don't have good coverage on both these volumes right away, that means something's wrong with your beam setup, your fields. You need to go adjust those jaw sizes, those arcs. Something's wrong with your fields. Okay, I'm gonna let it get to step 3. I really like to look at all 3 of my views. For things like prostates, I especially like this sagittal view, just because I don't know, I feel like you get a better idea. Our main priority for these cases, prostates in general, is the rectum and bladder. So in the sagittal view, you can really see if you're properly avoiding those structures, you know, the whole length of those volumes. Okay, so in step 3, I only have my targets in here. Always a good idea to let this level out, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I'll add an upper on my bladder, just kind of put it somewhere in the middle. Same with the rectum. Essentially, I'm just trying to start to shape out my dose, right? I want that 50% line to really carve in a lot in that rectum and bladder, so I'm just getting that process started with these uppers. Bowel, I just don't want any hot spots in my bowel. So I'm gonna do, so we're going to 46. I'm gonna go pretty strict, something like 47. And I'm gonna put something pretty high in there because I really wanna get hot spots out of there. Plus, the bowel is really big, 500 cc's, very small percentage of that structure is inside of my PTV and therefore above 46. So if I put 47 in there, in order for it to really work on that constraint, I need to push pretty hard here. You can see, I mean, we're at 49, so we're not meeting that constraint by any means, but look how low it is on our list right here. So it's working way harder on the body, bladder, and PTV than it is on that bowel. So I probably am gonna have to up that even more to get it to really focus on it and lower that dose a little bit, but we'll do that in a little bit. Penile bulb should be pretty good. It's well out of our field, so I'm actually not going to add anything on the penile bulb for this case. Femoral head, so I just want to point out, I'm using a structure template that was already in your system. So these femoral heads, we always talk about them we call it femoral heads, but usually you should see in your clinic, I mean, people contour the whole neck and femoral head and usually go down, you know, quite a ways. In our clinic, we go down till the sacrum bone disappears. So this slice or this slice we would go down to. But anyways, usually it's this whole thing. It's not just literally the head of the femur. But for this case, it's okay. You can leave it like that. Anyways, the dose here isn't too high. I don't have anything specific here, so I'm just gonna add my EUD and see if we can lower it a little bit on both sides. I'm not gonna push super hard though on these because essentially I need dose to, I want to carve as much dose out of the bladder and rectum as I can, right? Again, dose has to come from somewhere. So the more I squeeze on my femurs, the more dose I'll force through the bladder and rectum. We don't want that. So we want dose to come through those femurs if it needs to. So I'm just lowering the dose a little bit because I can. After we push on the rectum and bladder more, we'll see if we can get those down even lower. Anyways, that's pretty good. Bladder and rectum are looking good. They came down like we wanted. I'm going to add my typical EUD in there. Slowly push on both of these. You can see that is going to drive those lines down pretty good, which will let me drag these upper constraints down a little bit. See if we look at the sagittal now, that 50% line is definitely getting pretty tight along our PTV. It's out of that rectum, same thing out of this bladder over here. The problem we're running into right now is right above that boost volume, so right here in between this PTV and in between the bladder and rectum, because we're pushing so hard on both these OARs and to get coverage over here, it's throwing a lot of dose right in between and above our PTV right here. So this is getting pretty hot, up to 5250. So we'll add that upper on our body in level 2 like we always do, and it should bring that down a little bit. But this would be a good example of maybe for a second run, I would add a contour right here above that PTV and try to drive dose out of there, lower the dose to that area. If I would have added rings before planning, that would solve the problem too. So this is a good example of, you know, when to use those Opti structures. We'll see how much it cleans up as we go through here, but might have to run it again with a structure up there. Try to drive some of that lower dose out of the rectum if we can. So you can see I had 27 in here. It dropped below 27, so I'm going to lower it some more, see how low we can get. Same with this one. I have 23 right now. The actual is 21, so this constraint right here is doing absolutely nothing. So let's lower it. All I'm doing, I'm just slowly, slowly dragging these lines down. If you do it too fast, your end product usually doesn't look as good. If you do it slowly like this, works out pretty well. We really haven't lost any coverage yet, so we're going to keep pushing. also going to add an upper, like a max dose, so of 105, so 4830 again. Same as the bowel, because such a small percentage is actually above 4830. I'm going to put a high number in there. Do the same thing to the bladder, just to make sure our hot spots stay out of those two structures. If we look at these, so this one is 10%, the cost is 10%, so that constraint is working pretty hard, but like this one's 5, this one's 3, so I don't know, at some point I kind of stop dragging them back, and I will just up this number, see if it'll push any harder. This number is not dropping as fast, so this actual dose right here. So the bladder's probably getting close to as good as we can do. Something else you can do to try to, so again, this massive hot spot up here, right? It's just getting worse, because the harder we push on the rectum and bladder, it's just dumping dose right above the PTV. And you got to remember, other than the NTO right here, we're not telling it not to do this, right? I don't have a structure here that I'm pushing on at all. The NTO is supposed to handle this, but again, it's all about, it's a balance, right? Between meeting these constraints and meeting this constraint. So what you can do is you can up this, and it's maybe hard to tell, but immediately after I did that, that volume did go down a little bit, but you can try to use this to control this, but usually when it's small volumes like this, it's easy to take care of. You just have to do an extra run. So we'll do a second run after this to clean up that hot spot, if it doesn't clean itself up as we go forward. Okay, so I could maybe even keep pushing a little bit. We really, like I was saying, we haven't lost too much coverage. We lost a little coverage on our node volume, that PTV initial, but not too bad. But for the sake of time, I'm gonna play this forward. Overall, though, pretty happy with our bladder and rectum sparing. You can see we get all those isosceles lines to carve out of those structures. The only thing wrong with this plan so far is this giant hot spot right here. Pause it just a little bit. Let this kind of level out. You can see that this carving, getting dose out of the rectum and bladder causes dose to kind of spill on either side of those OARs, and that's okay. We kind of want that to happen. Again, dose has to come from somewhere. If you push too hard on this NTO, it'll start to try to control this spillage, and your rectum and bladder dose will go up. Okay, that's the trade-off. So that's why it's a balance between this and all of this. So you can't push too hard on this. So to deal with these like small hotspots like this one here, it's best to just leave it alone right now. We can contour it out after and run the plan again and use that smaller contour to control that hotspot right there. Okay, if this was a real plan, or for you guys, I suggest letting this level out a bit more, but I'm gonna push play just to move along. Gonna pause it in level 2, let it level out just a little bit. as it's leveling out, I'm just going to add in these constraints. 7. I'm just not going to add a priority yet. So with a priority of 0, it's not looking at this constraint yet. Can't see it. Whoops. And the only reason I'm doing this is I'm just letting it level out a little bit. Okay, again, I suggest letting it level out a bit more than this, but I'm going to go ahead and add these to the optimizer. So it should cool this area down. You can see it did. There is a little speck of hotspot right there, but it's slowly disappearing. But even if I cool this area down, you can see I still have that 100% line up into this area. So it's not very conformal in this area. So I still am gonna want to contour that area out and get as much dose out of that area as I can. Just because something you should always be shooting for is great conformality of your high isodose lines, at least. So like your 100, 95, they should be pretty conformal every plane you do. Well, 99% of the planes you do, at least. Okay, let's just play this. So if you look up here, you can easily tell that the boost volume has better coverage than that initial volume. So once it gets to level 3 over here, I'm going to push a little harder on that initial. So this constraint right here, I want to get those as almost identical, as close to the same coverage as possible, at least. I'm just letting this play through, but like I always say, pause, pause, pause. It'll help your plan out a lot. Level 3, I'm gonna bump this up, try to get that initial node volume covered a little bit better. So you can see our max dose is down to 49 gray. It was at 56, so again, that body constraint works really well. It did cool that area off, but it's still, we have our 100% line up in here, which ideally we would not, right? Intermediate dose, probably not super necessary for prostate cases, but I suggest you guys experiment with it. Try turning that off. Try not calculating intermediate dose and see what it looks like, and then try turning it on and seeing what it looks like. I want you guys to experiment as much as possible with all this. It's really the best way to learn. All right, let's see what we got. So remember, we have our PTV total in here, right? So when I normalize this and say I want 100% to cover 95%, it's going to do that for our PTV total. But what I need to do is look at my DVH and make sure both of my actual PTVs are covered, both the boost and the initial. And you can see what I was trying to explain before the video started. The boost, I'm actually covering 100%, is covering almost 97%. So we have more than enough coverage on our boost, but our initial is just slightly under. So 100% is covering 94.7%, so not quite 95. So then what I can do is come down here and just normalize a little bit lower. So let's try 99%. %, 95.2, so over 95. So now we're good. Now both are covered by at least 95%. Let's see, our max dose is 108.2, so that's acceptable. It's not too bad. When I look at my isodose lines, pretty happy. Definitely sparing my rectum and my bladder. You can see the rectum back here is really tight, right? It looks really good. Bladder is not as good, but that's explainable. If you look over here at the axial slice, I mean, our PTV really hugs that whole volume, right? So it just can't quite get as tight as it can, you know, back here by the rectum. So this is pretty typical looking, you know, initial prostate plan. There's no real constraints that you're trying to meet for only the initial. All the constraints that you see are given are for the planned sum, so including the boost. So I'm going to give you some constraints to meet for this week, for this initial plan, just to make sure your plan's, you know, looking okay. Then next week, we'll learn how to evaluate the planned sum and what to do if we're not meeting one of those constraints. You may have to rerun this initial plan too. Okay, so this week and next week are very much kind of connected, okay? We're just breaking it down into 2 weeks. The only thing I don't like about this plan, again, is this little bit of higher dose that kind of squeezes up above this PTV here. So I would, if it was me, I would contour that area out and get that dose out of there. Let's look at our conformality index though, just for fun. Whoops. So the conformality index for our PTV total is 1.12. You should almost always be shooting for something under 1.1. So if we cleaned this area up right here, so all of that right in there, it would improve. I would probably add a ring too. So at least that 70% ring, that ring 70 that we made in class last week, I would make that ring, push on that, and just separately contour out this area right here. That will greatly improve my conformality, and then I would be done with this plan, okay? Otherwise, you know, let me know if you have any questions, and have fun.